Welcome back to Rerouted. We're going to do something a little different today. I am going to take some time and we are going to go through something I think I know a lot about, which is internships and how to make the most of your experience, or as I'm going to call it, Internmaxxing. So I want to start by just giving some of my credentials, so to speak. I am in my third internship right now for a summer. I did my first internship I got after my freshman year of college. I was a product engineering intern at John Deere. I did a lot of mechanical design work there, some testing in the engineering field. Next internship, I did an instrumentation controls internship at a company called Burns & McDonnell. They're an engineering consulting firm. And now this summer, I am also in another instrumentation controls internship at a different company called Sargent Lundy. So I have a lot of experience with how to do internships well. I also have experience at different types of companies. We're going to go through this whole shebang. We're going to talk about a few different things. I already kind of gave some of my credentials, which I thought was kind of important. We're going to talk about what a successful summer internship looks like. We're going to talk about some things to do, the first thing you should do when you get in there, or I know this is coming out after some internships have started. I know I'm in week 3 of my internship. I started really early, but still things to do early on. And then we're going to talk about like the real importance of advocating for yourself, some daily habits that you can do as well. Halfway through the internship, what do you want to do? We're going to talk a lot about networking in an internship. That's really important. We're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about the last things you should do, and then that'll be it. I hope that you enjoy this. This is something that it is, I wouldn't say outside of my comfort zone, but it's just a different thing for me to do. No guest, full solo for episode 8, 19. So, all right. So we're going to talk about a successful internship first off. The most important thing to do is that you need to define what your goal is for the internship. Is your goal to get a return offer, no matter what? Is your goal to learn a lot about the field that you're in, whether that be, I have engineering experience, I study mechanical engineering, but whether that be something where it's like, do you want to learn a lot about marketing if you're in a marketing internship? Do you want to learn about the industry that you're in? Do you want to learn a lot about the company that you're in? Or do you really just want to get that return offer, right? So I would say that regardless of what your goal is, you really should prioritize learning. That's what internships are for. That's really the key important thing. What you learn that's where you can vary quite a bit. For example, if maybe you're not exactly sure which direction you want to go with what you're studying, you're an earlier place in your college career. If that's you, that's awesome. That's great. Getting experience early on is so huge. But maybe you want to learn a little bit more about different things that you could do or about the role, right? That's something you want to learn about. The field or the industry that you're in. I learned that I really love the power industry. I love the energy industry. I think it's very interesting. I really enjoy it and I find meaning in doing work in it. That's something that I learned through an internship, right? You want to also take some time and try and learn about the company culture, what you like and what you don't like. I worked at very different places. I worked at a Fortune 100 company, and then I worked at an employee-owned consulting firm. And the culture that comes with those two different places is very, very different. John Deere people had a lot of pride in the work that they did. They had a lot of pride because it was something where their grandfathers were fathers, their fathers were farmers, and now they are working at John Deere, the farming company, right? The brand means a lot to them. And then my next company, Burns & McDonnell, it was very different because people didn't have that, nowhere near that same like generational, desire to be part of a great brand, so to say. But they were employee owned, which means all full-time employees got stock. The employees were the only ones that owned stock. And that drove a very passionate and collaborative culture that was really, really cool. So it's something where you kind of want to figure out what kind of culture you like, learn about the culture. That's really important, I think. And then also too, your priorities in a workplace, that kind of goes into that same thing, hand in hand a little bit. But just if it's something where it's like, look around. Are people around you doing a ton of overtime? Are they getting paid for that overtime? Are people around you just kind of clocking in, clocking out, right? Think about what you like. Think about what you want. Talk to people who are doing it. This is really your best time to do that. I would also say the next most important thing is that you got to do good work. 100%. You've got to do good work in an internship, regardless of whatever your main goal is. If your goal is to get a return offer, of course you have to do good work. But regardless, you got to do good work. Because the better that you do work, the more you learn on like specific things. So if you just kind of throw in the towel on different assignments that are given to you, you're not learning as much on those, right? That's going to make it harder to get that next internship. It's going to make it way harder to talk about your experiences. It's going to make it, quite frankly, a lot less enjoyable while you're doing it. And yeah, also too, the better that you do the work, the better your impression, which matters whether or not you want a return offer with the same team or something like that. You really should leave a good impression. Regardless, this is maybe one of the few times where you have a boss in a professional context where you want to be in for your career. That person's going to be a great, maybe a referral, or someone who can connect you with other people, or just someone who knows a lot more, someone who's older and has been in the field and kind of around the block once or twice. So that's a relationship that you probably want to nurture a little bit. That's someone you can really learn from. You want to leave a good impression on them, and then also to the people who you're working with on your teams as well, whatever that might look like. These are also people that you can learn from and you can use for network as well in the future. So yeah, you really does come back to what do you want out of the summer, and I think you got to change your priorities a little bit based on that. I think that's really the most important way to start. I don't think there's one good way to do an internship, so to speak. It fluctuates, it changes. That's kind of a nice thing about it. All right, we're going to talk a bit now about what to do on your first week. So I'm going to say like day 1, day 2. And like I said, I know this is coming out like maybe you've already started your internship. Oh well, always better late than never. You want to make your priorities really clear to your manager as soon as you can, right? If your priority is to learn a ton about the work that you're doing, the work that you could be doing about the company, about the industry, if you want to get a return offer, if you want to do great work, if you want to be a really high performer, you want to come back there next summer or next full time, right? You want to make your priorities really clear. That's going to really help you out in the long run, because your manager is there a good manager is somebody who advocates for you, is somebody who looks out for you and makes sure that you're getting access to the best opportunities that you can, right? And if you don't tell your manager what you want, then they can't help you get what you want, quite frankly. In my experience, people are really like supporting interns, and that doesn't just go for managers. That's everyone. Everyone loves supporting interns, which is really great for you in that position. You have an opportunity that not a lot of people in a company have, where people are kind of looking out for you at a lot of different points, right? But first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to set up a meeting with your manager, maybe your mentor if you have one, depending on whatever the structure of your program looks like, and just let them know what your priorities look like, and so that they can help you get the most out of the summer, and that way you can just get the most out of your summer, quite frankly. You're going to want to introduce yourself to some of the team. You're going to want to meet them. They're going to be really great resources for you too. Of course, it's going to look different regardless, depending on where you are. Sometimes it might be something where this summer it's looking that I'm a little bit more isolated than I've been in the past, in terms of my work is a lot more siloed versus than what I've experienced before, and I just haven't met as many people. But it's really nice too, and different people can be a great resource for you, especially if you feel like you're really nagging one person. It does help to have some different people to nag sometime. But plus as well, these are just people that you can be connected with who have interesting things to share, have good perspective, all of that jazz. You're going to also want to meet the other interns. I spent 2 summers in places I didn't necessarily want to be. I spent my first summer in East Moline, Illinois, which is pretty much the middle of nowhere. But because I actually made like pretty good friends pretty quickly, it made the summer experience outside of work a lot more enjoyable. And even inside of work too, you screw around sometimes, it's like the joke, especially like in like some of the later weeks, hang out with the interns. But it really does make the experience a lot better outside of work. Than the second summer I just didn't do as great of a job as that. I said no to too many invitations too early on, and then I just did not have nearly as enjoyable of a summer in my social life because of that. It is kind of cool to be able to hang out with people your own age they just met that go to different schools and are interested in the same types of things you are. I really wouldn't waste that opportunity. That's something there. Also too, if you can be the person who is the one who's setting things up outside of work too, that's bonus points to you. That's a cool person to be. The person who's pulling in other people, making sure other people feel included and are enjoying their time, and if you're actively making a good social environment for people, you're winning there. You're also going to want to start getting to know what different people do. This is going to be something that's going to be a gradual throughout your time, throughout the internship, but you got to start at some point, right? So that is not only engineers, or I shouldn't say engineers, for me, engineers, right? But that's not only for other people in the business group, people who have different roles, who support different teams in different ways, right? That's people all across the business. So if you're on the business side and you're in some sort of engineering company, to know some of the engineers. If you're in engineering, get to know some of the business people, right? That is something that's really valuable. I'd also say too, there's a lot of value in getting to know the people who are like the office managers or the floor managers, this like executive assistants. They know a lot about the company, like a lot. They know how things work a lot better than a lot of other people do, which is something that's very, very valuable. And they're always really nice too, for the most part. So get to know them as well. There's a lot of value there. I would say probably the biggest, most important thing about this is you need to advocate for yourself. You cannot go through your internship just kind of floating around waiting for people to give you stuff. Some people, it's their job to give you stuff, but people also have a full-time job, right? It is not their full-time job to make sure that you're not sitting on your hands all internship. You really, 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 really need to advocate for yourself. So that's, if you're bored, you need to tell somebody about that. If you're not doing the type of work you thought you'd be doing or didn't want to be doing, you got to tell somebody about that, right? Especially once you know what your goal is for the internship, once you know what your main priorities are, if you're not on track to hit those priorities or hit those goals, you've got to talk to somebody about that. Internships go by way too quickly for you to sit around for 2 weeks, not do anything, and then get up the courage to ask somebody for help, right? It is always better if you do these types of things earlier as well. One, so that way you have more time to actually do the work. You're not sitting there bored. And then also as well, it is more acceptable to ask more questions earlier on. Of course, you want to ask questions all throughout, but really, when you first get there, that is your prime time of this is when I can start doing this stuff, right? You want to set that expectation early. And then also as well too, just when you're new, you can ask stuff, right? People know that you know nothing, which is really great, kind of a nice position to be in. But eventually you should start knowing stuff, right? You can't ask basic questions on week 11 if you have a 12-week internship. You just can't, unfortunately. Fortunately, whatever, that's just how it works. But back to advocating for yourself, you really do need to, once you have your priorities, you have to make sure that you're doing what you can to reach those, right? Nobody else has your best interest at heart like you do. Like I said, people have their full-time jobs. Their full-time job is not to watch you and babysit you and make sure you're getting the best experience. That really is your job. Also, too, it goes back to you got to know what you want and who to get it from. So if you need more work, you want something different to do, you got to talk to your manager. You got to talk to your mentor, some sort of supervisor, something like that. If you want to learn more about something, ask somebody else. Ask somebody on, maybe it's a team, maybe it's on, maybe you know another intern who does work in a different thing that you want to know more about, right? Ask them, hey, can I talk to your manager? Who's your manager? Who do you work with? I'd love to talk with them. And then shoot them a Teams message. Once you're internal, you can talk to anybody, truly, as an intern. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. But yeah, that's a really key thing. If you want to learn about something specific, ask the person who does the something specific. Right? It is really beneficial to remember that you're not bothering people. Truly. Like I said, people expect interns to not really know anything. And also as well, people really want to help. People too, you kind of underestimate the corporate world seems to move a lot slower than classes and stuff. People kind of expect you for like that first like really 2 weeks to not really do a lot in a lot of different positions. That's been my experience, at least, like in 3 different companies in, I'll say 2 different roles for the sake of diminishing my experience a little bit. But you're not bothering people. People want to help you out. And if you're really bothering people, they'll tell you. They really will tell you. I wouldn't worry about that. Don't avoid asking questions because you're worried about bothering people. Don't avoid getting the most out of your experience because you're worried about bothering people. You're there for 12 weeks. They can deal with you for 12 weeks, really. You're fine. Don't sweat it. All right. Daily habits for success. One, you got to have a to-do list. You got to have a to-do list. You got to have a calendar. Of course, right? They're all adults. We're all adults. You gotta have those things. I feel like that goes without saying, but in case it doesn't, you gotta have a to-do list. You gotta know what you're doing at any given time. Make small talk, I think, is a pretty underrated tip. Really spend some time chatting it up with your coworkers, right? If it's something where if you're at the coffee machine, make small talk, chat it up. It's nice to be the guy who people like, right? It does go a long way. That's kind of what the big thing about being in an office is, quite frankly. It's a lot of small interactions. It's a little tricky sometimes to talk with people who are significantly older than you, right? I've had managers who have kids my age. That it sometimes you don't have as much common ground as you will with somebody who that you meet in a bar, right? Just reality. But you'll find something, right? And quite frankly, being able to talk with people who you don't have a lot in common with is a skill in itself, and it's a valuable one at that, I personally believe. I do think that it's important to try to avoid being the goofy intern, right? I had a guy in my last internship who became known around week 3, week 4 for being the intern who watched NBA clips all the time, right? He had a huge monitor that faced out into the hallway that everyone walked down. And everyone knew very, very quickly that he watched NBA highlights constantly. You can't be that guy. I remember hearing about that from, there was one of like another intern's mentor, totally different team, but like full-time engineer, like 6 years into their career, right, was catching on like, this guy just watches NBA clips all the time. You don't want to be that guy. Really, stay off your phone, you know? Don't do stuff you shouldn't on the laptop, especially if you're really highly visible. If you're tucked away in the corner, sure, you can get away with doing a little bit, but realistically, also too, if you have work to do, get work done. Comes back to one of the most important things: do good work, put out quality stuff, make sure that people like it, right? That's really important. And if you're on your phone, you can't do that. Point blank, period. Another thing that I really like to do is I like to keep a daily reflection log. It's really nice. I kind of use it half as like a diary and then half as like a kind of a tactical list. So it'll be something where mine has 3 parts. There's a reflections, a tasks in progress, and a tasks completed. So reflections is just what I think about the day. Did I meet anybody new? Did I learn anything new, right? Whether that be something that's like, I learned this about the company, I learned this about my role and what that might look like, I learned this about what my progression might look like in this company. Then for tasks in progress, whatever you're working on, that you're still in progress, right? If there are any sort of blockers, right, throw those on there. Those are nice to track over time. If there's something that's continuously in your way, that might be a good conversation to have. It might be also a place where if you're doing a task that is very typical of somebody on your team and you find that it's being blocked in a particular way pretty consistently, you're probably not the only person who's having that problem. So maybe that's somewhere where you can try and innovate on something a little bit. Places love integrating AI right now, right? If there is something though, where if you're like, hey, I think I can make a tool for this, whatever, try it out. Throw it up to your manager, It is a pretty cool place to be as an intern, to throw up new stuff. People don't really expect it at all. I've done this a little bit in the past. My last internship, I got so much boring grunt work that I tried spending some time automating it. And it was, I think, the most enjoyable part of my summer, personally. Most interesting for sure. And it made a lasting impression on some people who have already talked to me about full-time jobs. So it matters. It means something, right? But regardless, tasks in progress, tasks completed. I feel like those are pretty self-explanatory, but it's good to know. Also, too, when somebody comes and asks you, then they're like, maybe you haven't talked to your manager for a second. He's like, hey, what'd you do this past week, right? You have documented evidence of the things that you've done. You now can pull, oh, here are all my tasks completed. I've heard some people as well give the advice of sending like an update to their manager at the end of every week. Depends if you see how frequently you see your manager, right? But those are good things to do. It never hurts to put the person who is in charge of your return offer or a critical part of your experience, let them know what you're doing, right? That's good stuff. Okay. And then last point, I definitely say I would make a habit to talk to new people. Talking to people is great. It's mixes up your day a little bit. Sometime when you're in the trenches, and you don't have a lot of work, whatever, talking to new people, it's nice. It's good. And you meet new people. Meeting new people is great. All right. Like halfway through the internship, you're going to hit a point where you're like, holy shit, I'm halfway through this internship. I have done nothing, or I've done everything, but time is really, really flying by. I think that this is a really critical point to set up some time with your manager or your supervisor, your mentor, whoever, like we talked about at the beginning, and just talk about how things have been going. I think that's super important. Check in, have time where you can course correct. If you're not doing something great, have time so that way you can fix it in the future, right? Asking directly is going to be one of the only ways that you can get this piece of feedback. There are so many trash interns. I've heard so many stories from so many managers of trash interns. The bar's on the floor. And so if you're trash, sometimes they're just going to be like, it's just another one, throw them out, whatever. So you don't want to be that way, right? You don't want to get left in the dust just because you're struggling and you don't necessarily know it. Hopefully that's not happening to you. But it might be, right? So talk it through, though. Talk it through with your people. Get the feedback. Give them feedback. Sometimes they might want feedback on how they've been doing. Management's also a skill that managers and supervisors and mentors are often looking to improve upon, right? you're someone new, you can give them feedback too. That is actually something that you can offer them if that's something that they'd want, right? If you don't like how something's been going as well, other than just you haven't been doing something great, you're going to want to address it. You always want to address that stuff sooner rather than later, but having a pretty dedicated, like, this is time that we're checking in really does help that. Really does help that a lot. So if you're not doing the type of work that you wanted to do, talk about it. You're going to want to also like reflect on where you are with your goals. If one of your goals was to have a coffee chat with somebody every week, and if you aren't meeting that goal, that's something that you want to reflect on, right? Even if it's not something that is directly related to your work, if it's related to anything that you want to be learning in your internship, that's something you want to bring up, as long as they're aware of those goals, right? Yeah. Networking. Internships are the single best way to network, period. People talk about the cold outreach, right? People talk about the posting on LinkedIn. People talk about all that type of stuff. Internships is where it's at. Interns are like puppies. I think I made this up. I might not have made this up. I don't know. There was a career advisor at the University of Iowa that I met at an event, or gave a talk at an event I was at. And he had this expression. He said, students are like puppies. You can't say no to puppies. So I'm changing it a little bit to interns are like puppies, because nobody says no to interns. It's great. Take advantage of it, because people don't like full-time employees as much as they like interns. Quite frankly, you have way more leverage as an intern than you do as a full-time employee. I've had one-on-ones with execs. I had a one-on-one with an exec at John Deere, and he's connected me with his wife, who does recruiting for a company I was interested at, right? That's something that, quite frankly, full-time employees aren't getting the opportunity to do that. Point blank period. But being an intern gives you the best leverage to network with people inside of the company, 100%. This is huge, because it's something where this is going to be the best way where you can learn a lot about the company, learn a lot about different roles inside the company. But also as well, if you're in a role that you're not exactly thrilled about, you have the opportunity now to start building connections with people in roles that you are thrilled about, right? Engineering, there are a ton of examples. If you're a manufacturing engineering intern and you want to be in design, right? Talk to a bunch of design engineers, talk to the managers, talk to the hiring managers, try to see if you can get a little something going on that side. If you're in marketing, you really want to be in sales or finance or something like that, right? Now's your time. Meet people who do those different types of roles. I think especially if you're in a big company, there are people who do all sorts of things, right? There are teams for everything. That's going to be the time where you're going to be able to start networking with people in those types of positions that you might actually want more than the ones that you're in now. That's huge, really. You don't have to do any sort of cold outreach, right? You have these people's emails and you have them on direct messaging on Teams, right? Shoot them an email and say, hey, this is who I am. This is what I want. And can you talk to me for half an hour? It's really that easy. It's a 3-sentence email just going, I'm an intern. So-and-so told me to talk to you because I'm interested in this. Can we talk about this, that, and the other thing? You're going to hit a crazy hit rate on that. I remember at John Deere, I had 32 coffee chats throughout the summer, which seems like a lot, but quite frankly, I think that's actually what you should be aiming for, is 2 to 3 per week. Truly, I think that's a good goal. I had 32 though, and I had reached out to maybe 33 people, right? Everybody said yes to me. On the flip side, I had a very different experience at my next company. At Burns & McDonnell, it's a consulting firm, which means that the company makes money by selling their employees time, right? Which effectively means that any sort of coffee chat or anything that they do, it's not billable, which means that it's on their own time. So I got a much lower success right there, just because it is something where people were taking their lunches effectively to talk with me about that type of stuff. And I was still talking with people. That's not what I said at all. I had great conversations there. I met some awesome people, 100%, but I wasn't getting that 98% hit rate on those ones. And that's fine. It's just something to keep in mind, right? But like I said, 2 to 3 per week. I actually think it's a really great place to be. Talk to people in different functions, talk to people who do different things, talk to managers of interns, talk to anyone who you might be interested in. If you're ever on like an exec call or something where somebody from the executive board, if they ever go, oh, reach out to me if you ever want to talk or know more about this thing or something, nobody takes them up on that. You can be the person who takes them up on that. And if they offer, they mean it, truly. So if you have, I've seen it where people, 450 interns in a class, right? Nobody takes up on that. One person takes it up, right? You only get that opportunity as an intern. Truly, you don't get the opportunity to interface with leadership that much as a full-time employee. So 100%, you have access to all these people. Take the opportunity. I think a good way to start is if you ask your manager and your mentors for recommendations for who to talk to. That will give you a pretty good starting point. And then based on those conversations, then ask the people who you talk to if they have anybody that you recommend you speak with, right? If you're really interested in PR at a company, you're not in a PR facing role, but you want to do something like that, ask your manager, hey, who do you know who does PR? They might be able to connect you with somebody. Then you talk to the PR person, they go, okay, is there anyone else on your team? Well, surely you probably know about that. And you're like, well, is there still interest in this? Is there anyone else you think I can talk to? They might point you laterally. So maybe a coworker, right? Somebody who does slightly different work on a little bit of different angle. I don't know PR that well, right? I kind of want to avoid using engineering as another example though, just because that's what I really know. But, or they might point you up to their manager, somebody who might make the decisions. These are good connections. And you always get a little something out of them, right? You're not just like hot and cold, like cold cut, like I need job, give me job. It's, you get to learn about people's career. That's really interesting stuff, at least to me, right? I host a podcast on this stuff, so I find it really interesting, but you get to learn a lot. It's good. All right, we're going to talk about the last week. The biggest thing that you want to do is you want to get feedback on your performance, right? You can't implement it anymore. Maybe it doesn't really matter, right? But it's something that you want to know going forward, right? If it's something where you kind of want to be able to get out some feelers too, right? You want to know how you did. That's important stuff. You're going to want to next as well. You're going to want to get a timeline or return offers. Maybe you already know, maybe you don't. In my last 2 internships, it was one of those things where they have big intern classes because they want to hire a lot of new people. So they kind of tell you like, oh, you're going to get a return offer. That's kind of a given. Unless you suck, you're going to get a return offer, right? I haven't worked in like IB or something where it's like you're fighting for that spot. But in my experience, at least, it's just something about the timeline. You want to know what that looks like, especially if you're looking to get more jobs. You want to know when our return offer is typically going to get put out. You also want to communicate what kind of offer that you want. If it's something where if you're looking for another internship, what kind of role are you looking for that internship in? If you are manufacturing and you really want to go to design, now's the time you've got to have that conversation with your manager, with the recruiter, maybe the hiring manager for that other team that you might want to be on, right? These are things that are really important to know just because now's the time to do it. Now you're still in front of it. You've still got your email address. You still have Teams, all of this type of stuff before you go. Next thing you're going to want to do is you want to download and email your work to yourself. If you're working on stuff that's confidential, proprietary, use your best judgment. Don't violate any sort of agreements that you do or anything like that. I don't want to get myself in trouble or anything, but save your reflections. Another thing I like to do on my reflections is document contact information of people. So save that information too. Email addresses, roles, that type of stuff. You should be connecting with people on LinkedIn, but not everyone uses LinkedIn, right? So save that information too. That's huge. And that's kind of the last point. You want to collect contact information of people you'd like to stay connected with. So that might be phone numbers, depending on the nature of the relationship. That definitely emails 100%. And you should be connecting with everybody on LinkedIn. Non-negotiable. Just do it, right? Nobody cares about that stuff. But yeah, that's all I have. I hope that you enjoyed this. It is something where I've never necessarily just yapped to myself for half an hour. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. If you're interested in more of this type of content, where I give a lot more tactical feedback and just kind of yap for a little bit, say something. If you made it to the end, I hope you liked this. So yeah. You can find all the details about the show in the bio, such as our LinkedIn, Instagram, all that good stuff. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something from this. I'll see you next week. We got a really exciting guest for you. So we'll be back with that. Probably do like every other, I'm thinking, for this style. So if you like this, let me know. Just being honest. Comment as well. If you have any questions, comment those too. I'd be interested in knowing. I'll probably do more stuff around internships just because that's really my bread and butter, quite frankly. I could talk a lot about that on personal experience. So if you have a question you want to know, ask it in the comments and I'll respond to you and answer it. And if it's a question that I think we can talk a lot more about, then I'll do another podcast episode about it. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next week.